From a wildly ambitious undertaking to a band member nearly quitting mid-recording process to a song that took 10 years to make, and this album's ties of course to the Rolling Stones. Led Zeppelin's sixth album, Physical Graffiti, has all the signature marks for an album that was made in the 70s, and on this episode of Retro Reviews, we will cover the history of this record, notable song scores of course, and its legacy. So let us begin. There is certainly no denying that the new Yardbirds, as Led Zeppelin were commonly known, had a massive string of successful records with their first 5 albums. In the first 4 years, they had transformed what was a year for 60 psychedelic tunes into a new era of what would become the golden era, I guess, of rock and roll music. There simply seemed to be no stopping the creative genius that was, and Physical Graffiti would prove that the band were willing to lay it all down for this record, even returning to Headley Grange where they recorded their 4th album. The original sessions took place in 1973, but had to be halted as Bad Company were taking over the estate to record their debut album. It was about this time that John Paul Jones showed signs of disinterest within the band and of course the constant grinding touring lifestyle. In fact, he nearly took the gig of becoming a choir master for the Winchester Cathedral, which he was offered at this time. But the band's manager, Peter Grant, told him to take a year off. Eventually, the band would return in January of 1974 and would record 8 tracks in the space of 2 months for their new album, which Plant stated were the belters. But the group also had a free-flowing platform to try out older ideas and try to air them out some more, which John Bonham would do and even suggest new ideas for these tunes, which would end up with him getting more songwriting credits on this record. This would mean many outtakes from previous sessions would be reworked on, upgraded, and eventually make it onto the album, which ended up with the 15 tracks that we know and see on this record. And of course, this was far too long for the standard of music those days, which was vinyl, so it would be released as a double album. New material from the new sessions and older material from the older sessions just reworked for this record. When talking about this album, it can be difficult to narrow down the criteria for what is a notable song. After all, you could almost mention the entire album, but that would mean that this episode would go for as long as the album itself, and I know you would much rather listen to that record rather than me harp on about various song facts while gushing all over this record. We know it's great, so I guess I'll just narrow it down to 5 songs. Let's start with the first one. Trampled Underfoot was the only single released from this album, which is quite impressive considering the amount of songs on hand on this record that would become staples for their live performances. But I guess they were in the business to sell albums after all, not singles at the end of the day. And the more singles that you put out, the less likely it might have been to recuperate the cost of the expense, of course, to produce this double-length vinyl album. Anyway, Trampled Underfoot did include the B-side of Black Country Woman, which is better than nothing, I guess. Trampled Underfoot is yet again another song that contains John Paul Jones playing multiple instruments, and on this tune he is playing the clavinet, which is that big crunchy funk sounding piano that you can hear throughout the piece. The clavinet section was also highly inspired by Stevie Wonder's song Superstition, and it wouldn't be a true Led Zep album at the end of the day if they didn't incorporate another musician's works into their own, I guess. And of course this is much to the chagrin to listeners of both sides of the party. In fact, the sources of inspiration don't even stop there, with the lyrics being resourcefully repurposed from a big source of Led Zep in their musical history, with Robert Johnson himself and his song Terraplane Blues. I'm bound to check your heart. There is also reason to believe the line talking about love was nicked from the song Love by Curtis Knight featuring Jimi Hendrix, but considering how generic this line is and how many other songs contain this exact lyric, it would be a bit of a stretch to say it was a direct source. After all, that would mean Van Halen's song of the same name would have been referring to the exact same song, right? Anyway, Plant considers this tune one of his favourite of all times, and when he plays this live, it usually of course features extended solos from all musicians. This song is easily the biggest head scratch moment on the record. By this stage in the career, of course, it was a commonplace for Led Zep to use outtakes from early recording sessions, and this album, of course, is no different. Run Your Stomp, for example, was originally on Led Zep 3 and re-recorded for this record. Even Down by the Seaside was originally recorded during Led Zep 4 sessions, and that song was surprisingly inspired by Neil Young's Down by the River. And Houses of the Holy was a similar story, except this was the title track from their previous record, and I don't think any other band has done it, because of course how out of place it looks. I mean, what's the point of a title track at the end of the day if it's not going to make it on the album? I guess when you listen to the song itself, you can understand how out of place this tune would have been on the previous LP. And even producer Rick Rubin once said of the track, "This is a funk jam with really interesting jazzy chords. It's one of their most compact feeling songs, and it's the only Zep song to use what sounds like a cowbell."
I gotta have more cowbell, baby.
You know that scene in Bohemian Rhapsody where Remy just stares at the tape and keeps rewinding it while adding additional vocal layers, and of course it gets to the point where the original master tape nearly broke because of the multi-tracking? I guess this song is Jimmy Page's version of that scene. It's got 14 guitar layers overdubbed in the harmony section. 14! Look, I don't care how much you love Page, but there was no way this tune was going to be faithfully played in a live setting. In fact, on the rare occasion the band did pull this out of the bag, John Paul Jones would have to use a goddamn 3-neck guitar with various bass pedals and loops like he was the precursor to Steve Vai or Extreme's Michelangelo. The complexity of playing this song, and most likely the insurance cost of the guitar itself, is perhaps the reasons why it was dropped from live set lists shortly afterwards. It did make one last appearance at the Nebworth Festival in 1979, however, and it's a real shame because this tune actually seems to be a real original piece and lives up to its name, taking 10 years to write. Well, sort of. You see, the lyrics were written by Plant back in 1965, before he joined Led Zeppelin, about an ex-girlfriend who made him choose between either her or music. And I know what you're asking, what choice did he make? Anyway, for any aspiring musicians out there, look to Robert Plant for love advice and ditch your partner, because if they don't let you follow your dream, then they are holding you back from becoming the next Led Zep. Screw paying bills, Spotify's got you covered, am I right? Jokes aside, the song was one of the pieces that came together during the actual recording process for this album instead of various outtakes, and this is yet again another great piece. This tune is one amazing song and is the longest Led Zeppelin song ever recorded at a whopping 11 minutes and 6 seconds in length. Hey, stop snickering, Pink Floyd fans. Sure, the band are not writing tunes that would rival the works of Yes, but they are a rock and roll band, not some prog rock connoisseur, so I think this tune deserves some credit at least for pushing the band's own envelope for what was accepted, and I'm guessing this would also carry over to tunes like Achilles' Last Stand on the following album. In fact, when the band would set about recording this tune, they just started an impromptu jam session at the end because there was nothing written for that part yet, and Bonham can even be heard saying, of course, like a lot of Led Zeppelin's works, this one borrows from a blues musician from earlier, and the tune in particular is a 1920 song, Jesus Make Up My Dying Bed, originally performed by Blind Willie Johnson. But Led Zeppelin weren't the first ones to actually borrow this tune. That accolade would instead go to Bob Dylan and a tune off his first album. So I can die easy, Led Zeppelin would use the Bob Dylan song as their basis for this song off the record, so I guess it's like when someone says, sure, you can copy my homework, but make sure to change it. And then you copied that guy's homework who copied that guy's homework. Wow, that's got to be like 3 degrees of separation compared to the original songwriter. I guess that's considered progress when it comes to Led Zeppelin's Bandcamp. Anyway, Zakk Wylde would cover this tune for his album Pride and Glory, and this tune would also serve as the last piece ever sung by the legendary Chris Cornell before his passing, when he would interject this piece into Soundgarden's song Slaves and Bulldozers, singing the lyrics, "In my time of dying, ain't gonna cry, ain't gonna mourn. All I need for you to do is drag my body home. Well, 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 so I can die easy. Jesus gonna make up my dying bed." Chris Cornell was found to have committed suicide shortly after this concert. Wow, that got real dark. We need to lighten the mood. The song Kashmir is certainly an epic for the ages that is a must listen to for any Led Zeppelin fans out there. In fact, pretty much all of the band agrees this is their best song they ever wrote and would be played at every live performance they ever did from its inception until the band's last show. This time around, there was very little pushback from the radio station when they were asked to play this 8-minute plus tune, as Stairway to Heaven had already blown the acceptable duration for what was a radio-friendly song out of the water, and longer tunes were becoming more and more popular. Unsurprisingly, this tune came together rather quickly back in 1973 during the original recording sessions. The lyrics were written when Plant was driving through the Sahara Desert while en route to a Moroccan folk music festival, because of course he was, and as for the riff itself, well, Page had that one rattling in his head and was eager to expand on it once he got back into the studio. Plant also stated that what really added to this song was the drumming, and it wasn't necessarily what Bonham did, but rather what he didn't do, as he let the band, take center stage for this tune and certainly seemed to down-tempo his own music, and it perfectly fit for what was this song. We also got to mention the inclusion of the orchestral arrangement, which is so symbolic for the tune and certainly elevated it to a scale of new levels that reflected the lush location that it's based after. And this is easily a better song you want to play if you were in Kashmir itself, as opposed to Holiday in Cambodia by the Dead Kennedys if you were to visit Cambodia. And trust me, I've done the latter. Although the location of Kashmir is renowned for its silk, it is also a hotly contested location inside of India that is claimed to be owned by Pakistan, and we know how that border is treated.
I love Pakistan, I will sacrifice my life for Pakistan!
Speaking of hotly contended, this tune would also be remixed and reworked by P. Diddy and Jimmy Page for the 1998 Godzilla movie and appears in the end credits. I'd like to say this is the only common thread they share, but unfortunately that's not the case, and no further context will be provided. You know, it's been quite funny reading up on the album and its history, and of course, at the same time, an eye-opening experience. For example, I wasn't aware how many times in this record Led Zeppelin and Rolling Stones past interjected, and of course, while many would most likely be aware of the Rolling Stones keyboardist Ian Stewart playing piano on Boogie with Stu, there was also some more connection points with, for example, Black Country Woman, which was recorded in the back garden of Mick Jagger's country estate in Hargroves. And even better, when Plant went outside to perform the vocals, was attacked by a flock of geese. You can't even make that shit up. Can you picture that? Oh hey, I'm just going to spend the weekend at Mick Jagger's place, get rotten drunk, maybe do some lines with Keith Richards, write a song in the process, and get attacked by freaking geese. I mean, they are vicious bastards. Have you seen their teeth? But could you imagine what could have happened instead if it was Black Sabbath's Ozzy Osbourne instead? I guess the other impressive feat is just how many of the songs are outtakes from previous sessions, which didn't make the cut for whatever reason. And I guess it pays off to keep the early works up your sleeve, as they tend to be the best stuff you write, before the fame and fortune and touring lifestyle jade your views for the worse. I mean, half of the record is older material per se, such as The Rover, which was from Houses of the Holy, Night Flight, which was from Led Zeppelin 4, and even Bron Yer Aur, which was originally recorded and released, of course, on Led Zeppelin 3, but this one was a re-recording for this album. So in a sense, Physical Graffiti is a studio album with another record tacked on it, and that other record contains various studio outtakes. It would almost be the equivalent of, say, if the Smashing Pumpkins released Siamese Dream with Pisces Iscariot on top of it as a double-length record, I suppose. Not to say this is a bad thing. In fact, Physical Graffiti, like Pisces Iscariot, is a great album containing material that was cut for various reasons, and I'm sure both fans would agree they are glad that these tunes saw the light of day. Instead, the album feels, at least to me, like the band's crowning achievement and perfectly showcases the band firing on all pistons. Well, John Paul Jones, of course, may have had issues early on in the recording process of this album, but he seems to have overcome it and of course shines through in his various instrumentals. John Bonham shows us not only why he is one of the greatest drummers as per usual, but also a creative force to be reckoned with, and this can be seen with his many writing credits on songs like In My Time of Dying or Kashmir. Plant brings his lyrics to life with his vibrant vocals on full display, and Page is just being Page, aka aka a guitar god. It's no surprise that one of their most famous live concerts was recorded mere months after the album was released, with the band performing a near 4-hour setlist at the Earl's Court in May of that year. And unsurprisingly, this record would go on to become the band's second most successful record in America, going 16 times platinum. While I mentioned earlier that this might be the band's crowning achievement, I'm not sure that I could agree in calling it their finest hour as well, because this album may contain many classic tracks on the band's catalogue. It does also drag in sections, particularly in the second half of the record. And this can be seen on tracks like Down by the Seaside, which I never particularly enjoyed, and of course always skipped on playthroughs. Or Night Flight, with its staccato riffage that makes a 3-minute song feel longer than it actually goes for. But a song that I want to mention, which is criminally overlooked for being the last tune, is Sick Again, and this shows us why John Bonham was such a boss. I can't say anything negative about the first half of the album, as it is pure perfection, and any fan of the band should consider these tunes not only essential listening, but mandatory for the younger generation, who needs to be taught how good music was. And kids don't know good music these days, because Robert Plant could fart better lyrics than Taylor Swift ever could. Sorry. My inner gatekeeper took a hold of me there. Look, it's no secret that I prefer music from the 70s over my own generation's stuff, but as they say, different strokes for different folks, eh? And well, I can only fathom the wild popularity of the band in that decade. They sure had their detractors too. While bands would cite previous musicians' works as inspiration for their music, Led Zeppelin would pretty much not exist without famously ripping off many blues musicians of old. And many have pointed out how many times they blatantly did so and succeeded with these tunes without giving writing credits to the original composers. There is a point to be made by that statement, but more often than not there is also an overlooked note about that, and that is that Led Zeppelin themselves were not simply performing covers in their early days, but more often than not the band would also take steps beyond simply performing covers of the originals or merely taking a section and using it in their song. In fact, the band usually would completely restructure the song to a point that it became unrecognizable to the source material. While this album certainly contains elements of this, it is vastly reduced compared to say the first 3 or 4 albums. This, along with the band having a rather free-form pressure approach to the recording process, I think shows the band truly coming into their own elements as they just jam on several pieces, and this would carry over to live performances as well. The band also show off elements of experimentation with the inclusion of elements of funk and almost disco-like beats and riffs on here, and considering the timing of this record, that is to say the so-called death throes of rock and roll, the rise of disco, and of course this was shortly before the punk scene took off in the UK, this record may have not been the success story it was if it was released maybe 2 years later. It is, and always has been however, an impressive album by the band and one of their highlights. When the album was released, it met critical acclaim, and here are many of the scores from musical outlets. AllMusic gave it a 5 out of 5, Chryscale Records gave it a B+, The Daily Telegraph gave it a 5 out of 5, the Encyclopedia of Popular Music gave it a 4 out of 5, Music Hound Rock gave it a 4.5 out of 5, Q gave it a 5 out of 5, the Rolling Stones Album Guide a 4 out of 5, Tom Hull on the Web a B+, and The Village Voice giving it the lowest score with a B. Over at Rate Your Music, the album sits at a highly impressive score of 3.96 out of 5 from over 25,000 reviews, which yes, I'm sure doesn't sound exactly too high for what should be considered a near perfect record, but when you look at many of the albums, it's damn near impossible to get even above 4. And this is more so once you consider that there are 25,000 people who have voted it. Many could be just trolling the album, while of course there are always going to be the fanboys. So this is an interesting score, I guess, to say the least. As for me, I think I would give this album a score of 13.5 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being the first 6 tracks off this record, plus 10 Years Gone. There is no denying Led Zeppelin's legacy to rock and roll. They are pretty much the messiahs of the genre, having defined and perfected it over their last few records. This album was somewhat of a vanity project at the end of the day, because releasing a double-length record was seen as the ultimate artistic statement for this time. It was seen as the crowning achievement that could only be accomplished by musicians who had either too much money or too many ideas. In the years leading up to this, we had seen the likes of such with the Beatles' White Album, The Who's Tommy and Quadrophenia, Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, and the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. In fact, in a bizarre twist of fate, Physical Graffiti's artwork would serve as the inspiration inspiration for the location of the Rolling Stones' choice to record their video clip for Waiting on a Friend a few years later, and it still looks the same after all these years. In fact, there is a cafe in this area called Physical Graffiti, to capitalise I guess on the Led Zeppelin fans who traverse all the way around the world to this location, and I think many fans would also agree, this is their favourite album by Led Zeppelin. While the band often reworked other pieces of music and incorporated their own style onto these tunes, this album actually served as a massive inspiration for a big song in the 90s, and that came from the Wonton song. It was cited by Tom Morello as being a huge influence for the song Viet Now by Rage Against the Machine. Even Robert Plant agrees this was his favourite release, and this showcased the band, of course, in all their creative prowess. U2's The Edge and Jack White are also massive fans of the album, and even had the chance to talk about this record, including jamming with Jimmy Page on the documentary called It Might Get Loud, which is quite a good watch if you haven't seen it before.
It just so happened that there was this song that I had called Swan Song, believe it or not, and it was all these parts and intricate guitar parts, and right at the very end of it, I had this thing which went like this.
Dream Theater would also show their respects to Led Zeppelin on their album A Change of Seasons, which included a performance mashup of covers, including of course The Rover, amongst many others. There is no denying the legacy this album left, as many would go on to call this the band's magnum opus, and the band certainly seems to agree with this statement. But as for me, if I would regard this album as their finest effort, well, I guess you'll have to watch my episode ranking all the Led Zeppelin albums from worst to best to hear how I feel about it when it's stacked up to the others. Anyway, thank you for watching this episode of Retro Reviews, and if you've learned something, smash that like button. Anyway, you have a great day, stay spicy out there, and play some Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day, and stay spicy. Can't believe I went through this episode without referencing Banksy. Missed opportunity.